Kickoff. Perfect. Looks like we're all set. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Lobianco. I'm the director of the LA County Department of Economic Opportunity. Welcome to the Know Your Rights Interactions with Immigration Enforcement webinar with the Department of Economic Opportunity and our partners at Public Counsel. For those of you that don't know us, I know we have hundreds and hundreds of folks who are joining us today. DEO is the county's economic development agency. And we're here to support our county's workers and businesses and to drive a more inclusive economy for all. I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to partner with Public Counsel and our fellow county departments like the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs and their Office of Immigrant Affairs on this Know Your Rights webinar. We're here to provide businesses and nonprofits guidance when faced with immigration enforcement. The actions of ICE since June 6 have resulted in tragedy for so many families and created very real fear and uncertainty for so many. Knowing your rights and requirements is an important step for all of our community members. At the Department of Economic Opportunity, we're very grateful to our supervisor, Hilda Solis, and our fellow Board of Supervisors for their support and recent actions. DEO will continue to engage and lift up webinars and workshops like this one for community to make sure that folks have all of the education they need to make decisions and support their employees and teams. And we'll also make sure that you all have connections to Public Counsel, BEDSETIC, and our partners who run the LA Regional Legal Aid Program day in and day out. We also will be sharing a series of reports on the true economic impacts of immigration enforcement and a new webpage of resources. So please stay in touch with the department. In July and August, these things will be released in short order, as well as new programming to support those who have been impacted. So some of that programming will include an expanded Youth at Work program, which is paid work experience for young adults 14 to 24, and will be directing those resources at those who have been impacted and families who have been impacted, as well as financial assistance for workers and businesses through a business interruption fund. Those are all coming. We're here to support during this time, but very grateful again for folks joining us this morning with Public Counsel for this Know Your Rights webinar. And so with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Sophia, to get us started. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Really appreciate you having us here. Ritu and I are attorneys with Public Counsel. We're a nonprofit legal services organization based in Los Angeles. And we are going to be presenting today on specifically how small businesses can support their staff and their clients and prepare for potential appearance of immigration enforcement or other federal enforcement agencies at their business. Before we get into that, just wanted to give a brief disclaimer that although Ritu and I are attorneys, we are not giving any legal advice. This is just legal information, and what you do with that is up to you. We're not your attorneys in this situation, and information changes daily. And so if you're watching this back as the recording, today is July 23rd, and we try to give the most updated information we can, but information always changes, and we can't promise that the information will always be true. Public Counsel is, as I said, a legal services organization. We serve low-income Angelenos with direct legal services, but also comprehensive legal advocacy like impact litigation. And Ritu and I are both in the Community Development Project, which specifically serves small businesses, nonprofits, and we also do policy work. Today, what we're going to cover is a brief overview of your constitutional rights. We're going to talk about preparing your files and confidential information before any federal agencies arrive. We're going to talk about how to identify ICE. We're going to talk about I-9 requirements. We're going to talk about raids and audits. We're going to talk about how to create and implement a policy for your workplace, public and private spaces, understanding warrants very briefly, your rights when stopped and arrested. We're going to talk about a new lawsuit that was filed in Los Angeles, and also tips for documentation. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A. Some brief logistics before we get started. Ritu and I are monitoring the Q&A, but heads up that we might not see it until the end, and so we will try to get to your questions. We cannot answer information about anything that has specifically happened to you or a personal experience, especially if there's confidential information. And so if you are asking a question that applies only to you, unfortunately won't be able to answer that, but we will try to answer in a way that maybe applies to more people, or if you could phrase your question in a way that's more generally applicable to all of the 400 people in this training, we'd really appreciate that. And as Kelly mentioned at the beginning, we are recording this right now, and we will share the recording and the slides out with folks who have registered for this training at the end. Also wanted to preview that this information can be triggering or distressing. I know folks have a lot of lived experience with ICE raids and may know even more than Ritu and I know about this, and I want to honor the lived experiences of folks in the room. Other folks won't be able to share based on our technology setup, but just wanted to honor that your own lived experiences, and also just let you know that it's totally fine to stop watching, take a break, walk away, and come back if you feel ready at any point. So I wanted to start by a general overview of your rights with immigration enforcement. And when we say immigration enforcement, we're referring to a lot of different federal agencies. The federal government is the one in charge of immigration, and so that could refer to ICE, which is usually what we'll say as a proxy for a lot of different departments. We'll say, immigration enforcement, but that could mean any of the Department of Homeland Security departments. With respect to all of those departments and also local law enforcement, everyone, regardless of immigration status, has the right to stay silent, has the right to ask for identification, the right to document and record, and the right to deny entry into private spaces, which we'll talk about later. You can also ask for supporting documentation, meaning if they have a warrant or a subpoena, meaning a document that allows them specifically by a court to enter into one of your private spaces. Those are all rights that come from the Constitution, from the Bill of Rights, or our amendments to the Constitution. The First Amendment says you have the right to be in public, you have the right to free expression, meaning that you can be in public spaces. And our Fourth Amendment says we have the right to be free of unreasonable searches and seizures, which gives us our right to deny entry into private spaces. Similarly, the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination gives us our right to stay silent, meaning that if you think that you are going to say something that could get you in trouble, you obviously have the right to stay silent, even if you don't think that you're going to get into trouble. And lastly, everyone has the right to be represented in criminal proceedings by a lawyer. And I wanted to highlight this because in contrast to immigration court, you actually don't have a right to a lawyer in immigration court, which is why it's really important ahead of time if someone feels that they have unclear knowledge about their immigration status. They should get a consultation now before anything happens with an immigration lawyer to explore their possible options. Once someone is in detention, it becomes much more difficult to find a lawyer, and the types of access that you might have to the outside world are much more limited. So the government will not appoint you a lawyer in immigration court, but if you are in criminal legal trouble, the court would appoint you a lawyer. Additionally, we wanted to talk about how to share information and store it. So the best practice is not to store any information if you don't have a specific business purpose for it. So if you have to, for example, collect residency information for a specific program that you operate, you should not be collecting information that goes beyond that scope. And if you have to collect, for example, that residency information, think about the way that you can expose the least amount of data with that collection. So could you ask for a telephone bill or a utility bill instead of asking for somebody's passport with their social security number on it? Once you have that information, you should know what information your business has on file, what information is on your business's computers, what is in your physical files, and ahead of any possible interaction with immigration enforcement, you should do an audit of all your files. For example, if you have a lot of client files, how long do you need to keep those? Certain industries, for example, may have a certain timeline by which they need to keep the information. And after that timeline, you should be destroying that information, for example, by shredding or by deleting it off your computer. So if you don't need the information in the first place, don't collect it. If you do need to ask for it, think about how long you need to keep it for. And then after that time, can you destroy it and how are you destroying it regularly? So you should be going to your physical office, literally looking at your files and seeing what is in those files. How is that information being kept? If it's a physical file, is it locked up with a key? If it's an online file, is it behind some sort of encryption? So is it in a password protected folder? And not everyone should have access to all of your files. If you have personnel files with the information about your employees, only your HR department should have access to those files and not every single person. And the whole point of this is privacy and data minimization. So in the case that federal agents do visit your business, or any other law enforcement for that matter, or any person that's trying to enter your business and look at your files, trying to hack you, the best practice is always to have the things as protected as they can, which also means that your business should be rolling out technology and security trainings for your employees. For example, identifying phishing hacks or also not saving personal documents to your desktop computer. And so you should have a policy for your business that covers how long you're keeping documents, how how the information is collected, and when it is destroyed. It's also important to identify what immigration enforcement actually looks like. So a lot of times we'll hear misinformation saying that ICE is present in a certain location when it's actually the local police. And so it's really important to ask them to identify themselves if you're not easily able to identify them from what they're wearing. Oftentimes, ICE officers, which stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, are either wearing plain clothes, meaning they're not wearing a uniform, and they're driving an unmarked vehicle, which is, for example, an SUV like this. A lot of times they will have out-of-state plates, for example, from Texas or New Mexico. And then sometimes they will have what's called a fleet sticker on it, which means they're using a rental car. The Homeland Security vehicles, Department of Homeland Security is the umbrella organization for all of the different federal immigration enforcement units. They typically have, if it's an official vehicle, they'll have a white SUV with a blue slash on it. And as you'll see in their uniforms, they usually have, it'll say police on it. Sometimes they will identify themselves as police. But it'll say police ICE or it'll say police Homeland Security. Oftentimes we do see them wearing plainclothes, as I said. So in that case, they are required to carry identification with them, but they're not required to show it to you. And so it's a good practice to kindly ask them to identify themselves. No promises that they will actually identify themselves, but it's always a good practice to try to ask. The other thing we are seeing more and more often is that Homeland Security and ICE officers are wearing heavily militarized outfits. So they're wearing more camo outfits that look more akin to the bottom right photo here for the Customs and Border Patrol officers. They are carrying weapons and wearing helmets and face masks. And just to explain very briefly these different departments, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is the entity that covers immigration enforcement, deportations and removals in the interior of the United States, technically. Department of Homeland Security is the umbrella organization. FPS is the Federal Protective Service. So they are the people that protect federal buildings like federal courthouses and jails. HSI is Homeland Security Investigations, which covers transnational criminal investigations, as well as monitoring international students and workplaces. And then Customs and Border Patrol, or CBP, Border Protection, depending on the acronym, they are the people that cover ports of entry, meaning border crossings, airports, as well as 100 miles from any border. And as you might have known, California has a very long water border, so CBP's range actually covers the majority of the state of California. HSI, as you'll see, they often are wearing dark on top and jeans on the bottom. CBP is wearing all green, and then they often are driving these larger vehicles, SUVs. This is in contrast to local police, the Los Angeles Police Department, the Sheriff's Department, and the California Highway Patrol. LAPD is the city entity, covers the city of Los Angeles. Sheriff's Department covers the county of Los Angeles. And then California Highway Patrol is a state agency that covers our highways. As you'll see, and in many different cities, the police look very similar. The local city police are wearing these blue uniforms. The sheriffs have a tan on top and dark on bottom. And the highway patrol wear these kind of all tan beige-ish uniforms. The difference is you'll see likely the emblem for the city or the county on the vehicle itself. It'll say sheriff or highway patrol. Again, you can ask them to identify themselves. They often carry business cards, which you can ask for. Shifting over to your I-9 requirements, the I-9 form is the form that every employee has to fill out when they're being hired, and it verifies to the federal government that this person is eligible to work in the United States. So this is saying, I have work authorization. And it's required for anyone who's an employee, but not somebody who's an independent contractor. And it only covers people who are working on US soil, not in other countries. It also wouldn't apply to somebody who's doing only occasional work on a sporadic basis in a home, for example, someone like a babysitter. And so when you get this form, the employee will fill out the top section, the employer will fill out the bottom section. They'll present some documents to you that prove there's like a list of documents. A lot of folks have probably seen this before. And after they do that confirmation, you'll keep a copy of the I-9 form itself, this document that's on the screen. And then depending on how you have reviewed their documents, you'll either scan and keep a copy, or you'll just return the documents to them and you don't need a copy. You must complete this I-9 within 3 days of their hire, which means their first day of pay. And when you get those documents, all you as the employer have to do is confirm two things. One, that the documents, meaning their passport, their driver's license, reasonably appears to be genuine, meaning it's not obviously a false document. and that it relates to the employee, meaning that it's not completely a different name or somebody else's documents. You're not required to independently verify that these documents are their documents. And then you would have to keep the I-9 documents for a maximum of 3 years after their first day of employment. So, for example, if they work less than 2 years, you keep it 3 years from their first day of employment. And if they work more than 2 years, you keep it just for one more year after they stop working for you. And then you are able to destroy those documents. One other note on this is that a lot of our businesses have shifted online, and I wanted to flag that there is a government service called E-Verify. Certain government contracts, if you are entered into a federal contract, may require you to use E-Verify, and you should look at that contract with the federal government to confirm if that's required. But for everyone else, it's not technically required unless you are remotely inspecting the documents. So if you're looking at the I-9 documents yourself, and you are physically inspecting them, you're not required to keep any copies of their passport or other documents. You can return all the documents to themselves. All you need to do is complete that I-9 form. However, if you are remotely inspecting them, meaning you're looking at them over Zoom or other means, you do need to use the E-Verify system. And the E-Verify system uses federal databases to confirm that that person's photo matches the information that the federal government has on this person in their databases. At times, there have been certain issues with false negatives. And so, if that does happen, you should give the employee time to confirm that they have the correct documents. And you would be required, if you're doing E-Verify, to keep copies of the person's documents that have a photo on them. So if it's a passport, you would be required to keep a copy of the passport. I want to talk about audits and raids because we've heard a lot about them. An audit is where the government is giving you a 3-day notice that they want to inspect certain documents. They will send you either in the mail or physically deliver a specific document called a Notice of Inspection, or NOI, and that will specify all of the documents that they want to inspect. It'll say, for example, we want to inspect your payroll documents, your licenses, your I-9 forms, etc. In contrast, a raid is where there's no notice. They have previously received permission from a court to seize documents, and the purpose is to catch the business by surprise so that they don't have time to hide any of their documents. As you'll see in these photos, for example, this was an incident where somebody was accused by a federal court of misappropriating funds from their business for personal means. And so what happens is that the federal agents, as you'll see, HSI, who govern workplaces, Homeland Security investigations, they will secure the exits, they will seize documents, and you still have rights even in this situation where they are making arrests and taking documents. You can ask to see the warrant, you can contact your legal counsel, you have the right to remain silent, you can document and record everything, which Rito will talk about in a moment. And you don't have to give any of your employees permission to speak. The best practice is to speak to a lawyer as soon as possible, not answer any additional questions until you've spoken to a lawyer, or not sign anything without the lawyer present, and allow your legal counsel to navigate the situation for you. In contrast, an audit may be triggered by surveillance, for example, of a business, a tip-off, or, for example, it's happened in the past where a bank flagged that a business was paying a lot of its payroll in cash, and that flagged for them that they potentially had undocumented people at their business. So they are looking for exactly what would be in the notice of inspection. They're going to tell you exactly what they're looking for, and they're going to give you 3 days to respond. So it's really important not to waive that 3-day period because you want to give yourself as much time as possible in order to respond to the notice and to potentially contact legal counsel, get all of your documents together. Sometimes they will ask you to waive this period, which means that they would be able to inspect your documents, go into your business, and inspect immediately. This creates more privacy issues and doesn't allow you time to prepare. If they do arrive in person, you can say, I will deliver these to your office, and I'm not waiving my 3-day notice period. You would not give ICE any consent to speak with the employees. You want to really constrain the inspection just to what is required in the audit. And there's a California law that also would require you to let affected employees know, specifically if they are being flagged in the audit, and also just post a notice that the audit is happening. If, for example, ICE finds unauthorized employees in your organization, they do not have work permit, you would be required to terminate their employment, and you can offer them, for example, unpaid leave until that time that they can get proper work authorization. But it's also good practice to, for example, give them a letter of recommendation. But yes, you would be required to terminate their employment if they're not authorized to work. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ritu.
Thanks, Sophia. Hi, everybody. I know it's a lot of information that we're trying to get through in a short amount of time. So as we've mentioned, we will be sharing the slides with you. This is being recorded. It'll be emailed to you. We are going to host another session like this in Spanish on a different date. We haven't set the date yet, but I just want to mention that. Someone asked in the chat, I'm just going to quickly answer this, but we'll save time at the end. On the I-9, you do have to keep the actual I-9 form for a certain number of years, as Sophia mentioned. But if you're reviewing the supporting documents provided by the employee in person, you're not obligated to keep those supporting documents. So that's the thing that we're trying to emphasize. So I will try to stop the content of the training by like 11:45 to give time for Q&A. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the importance of having a policy in place that your staff can follow in the event of an immigration agent visit and what the policy can say. Next slide, please. So having a policy is important, whether it's, just a single sheet of paper or several pages long, because it can help train staff for these unexpected and stressful situations. It can help protect your client and organization's legal rights. It encourages discussion and agreement within the organization, and it can communicate that immigrants are welcome and safe at your small business. Next slide, please. So we have a whole guide that we've developed. I'll put it in the chat. And at the end of it, it has sample policies that you can adapt to your own business. But you'll notice that the policies have different sections to them. So there's a scope, there's a discussion about the different types of employees that you may have and their roles in this process. There might be a discussion on rules around data collection and preservation, rules around, your physical space and how to monitor visitors, and then steps that staff can take if law enforcement, including immigration agents, show up at the facility. Next slide, please. So in terms of the scope, and again, for small business owners, you don't need to have a lengthy policy, but you just want your staff to know ahead of time, where this policy applies. So whether it's your main office or if you have multiple sites. For public counsel, for example, our policy applies at our main office and then also at our offsite clinics. And then you also want to talk in the policy about the different staff roles. So for example, in our policy, it says that, if staff encounters immigration agents, we are to immediately call one of 3 authorized representatives. An authorized representative can really be anybody that, your company wants to designate as an authorized person. It can be the owner, it can be like management level staff, just somebody who feels comfortable talking to immigration agents and who can review warrants. So you'll have staff, you'll have authorized persons, and you also want to make sure whatever policy you develop addresses all interactions with law enforcement and visitors, not just immigration agents, because as we mentioned, these agents may show up saying that they're police or, may be hard to figure out what agency they're with. Next slide, please. So I want to quickly talk about this distinction between public and private places because it's important. And the reason it's important is because under the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, all of us, regardless of our immigration status, have rights against unreasonable searches and seizures. And whether something is unreasonable depends on if we have an expectation of privacy where the search or seizure occurs. And that expectation of privacy depends on, it's from the objective perspective and subjective. So there's spaces where all of us have a reasonable expectation of privacy, such as our home, our private office, the bathroom. And then there's places that, we don't really have a reasonable expectation of privacy. These are more public spaces like the street, the park. In private spaces like your home or your office at work or the bathroom, an a law enforcement agent, including immigration, can't just like barge in and seize or, grab people or try to arrest somebody if they do not have a judicial warrant. So we have the right to ask them to produce the judicial warrant if they want access to a private space. In a public place, just like anybody can be in a public space, including these immigration agents. So to be in a public space, these agents do not need any type of warrant. Now, there are spaces that are more gray, for example, like a lobby. Um, and I know in some small businesses you might have a space that's private and then also a space that's public. So if you're trying to make a space private, you can put up signs, which helps, right? You can put up a sign saying private, authorized personnel only, but you also need to make sure your practices around that space are trying to keep it private. So for example, in a restaurant where people order food and they sit, that area is public, right? Because anybody can really come and go and sit in there. But you might also in the restaurant have a back office where like the manager does paperwork, or you might also have, the kitchen where only certain people are allowed to enter. So for the office and the kitchen, you want to put up signs that clearly mark them as private, and you want to make sure that you're not just letting anybody into the office and kitchen, during operating hours, that only people that have certain permissions are being allowed in those spaces. And for example, if you know that immigration agents are in the vicinity or in the neighborhood, you could think about, people have asked me this before, you could think about shutting your business down for the day, having customers go home and your staff go home, just as a precautionary measure. You could also think about moving people in your business from the public part of it to the private part. And this is if you don't know, right, who the immigration agents are looking for, you just know generally that there's been some activity in the vicinity. Now, if you know that they're looking for a particular person and they come to your business looking for that person, you cannot specifically help that person run away or hide them because that would violate federal law, and you could be charged with harboring or obstruction. Next slide, please. Okay, so in thinking about your space, right, your small business, think about what parts of it might be private, what parts of it might be public. Think about in which way do you allow visitors to access the space. As I mentioned, put up signs for spaces that are private and implement policies to keep those areas private. Also remember that while I said the agents do need a judicial warrant to enter private spaces, if somebody consents to them entering a private space, then they do not need a warrant. So consenting to their entry is an exception to the warrant requirement. So, we advise that people not consent, because otherwise they don't need a warrant. And then also remember the plain view rule. The reason this is important is imagine if, the agents are in the public counsel office and somehow they got access, they're walking around. If there's things in the lobby, for example, like on the receptionist's desk that anybody can walk by and see, like maybe client information, then these agents can also see it and seize it because it's in the plain view. When things are in the plain view, like anybody can see them, then so can these agents, and they do not need a warrant then to, seize the information. So that's why we're also saying if you have physical files, get into the habit of putting them in folders and locking them away, not having them open on people's desks. Next slide, please. Okay, so just quickly showing you what a judicial warrant looks like. Remember, this is the warrant that the agents would need if they want to enter a private space. So these warrants are issued by a court, a judicial court, and they're signed by a judge. They are valid for 14 days, so they'll have a date on them. And they will have a scope, okay? Like it might say, oh, this authorizes agents to search, whatever, X office. So whoever's in charge of talking to the agents at your business will need to know what a warrant looks like and will be asking the agents, do you have a warrant? I want to see it. And when you review it, you have to make sure, is it still current? Like, is it already expired? Because it could be. Is it signed by the judge? And is it a judicial warrant? And if it is, and if it's current and valid, you do have to comply with it. What that means though is like, let's say it says it gives them permission to search whatever, like one office. You allow them to search, but you follow them and you document and record what's happening. And you don't let them search other things that aren't part of the warrant. You basically tell them the warrant says you can search this place. The place you're trying to search is not part of the warrant. Now, again, if they don't listen to you, like if they don't comply with the law, like they don't produce a warrant and they barge into a private place, or they don't stay within the bounds of the warrant, all you can do, like we're not suggesting that you get yourself in their face or you try to put yourself in harm's way. What we are suggesting is you object, you say, you don't have a judicial warrant, I don't consent to you entering, or you don't have your warrant doesn't allow you to search this other space, I don't consent to it. And then you document and record what's happening from a safe distance because what you're recording and documenting can be used as evidence to bring a lawsuit against these agents for their unlawful behavior, or it can be used as evidence to help somebody's immigration case. Let's say through this unlawful behavior, they detain somebody. It's possible that the evidence you've collected can be used to help that detained person in their case down the line. Next slide, please. Now, the other warrant that exists is an administrative warrant. This is a warrant that is not a judicial warrant. It does not give the agents permission to enter private spaces. It's a warrant that's issued by an immigration agency itself. You'll see it says U.S. Department of Homeland Security. This warrant may give, for example, the agents the right to arrest somebody if it's a arrest type of administrative warrant on the street, like in public. It doesn't give them the right to enter your private business. Next slide, please. So in your policy, whether it's a long policy or a short one, there's some big things to remember. You want to make sure that you and your staff are not lying. So you don't want to lie to these federal agents. You want to either follow whatever your policy is in terms of how to interact with the agents or remain silent. Remember that law enforcement, including these agents, may not enter a private space without a judicial warrant. And whoever's on site, if they're not the authorized person who's designated to talk to these agents, make sure that they know to contact the authorized person and that there's a few authorized people, right? Because you can imagine a case where one of them isn't available to come and talk. So you want a few people authorized. Next slide, please. Again, reminder, stay calm if agents show up at your facility. Do not run. And I know it's hard because it's scary, right? When people show up with guns and you don't know who they are. But if you run, that they can try to say that you running help them form reasonable suspicion that you were doing something unlawful. So try not to run. If you're not the authorized person, contact the authorized person. Let the agents know that they don't have permission to enter the non-public areas without a judicial warrant. Ask that they remain outside. Whoever is the authorized person is going to inspect whatever documents these agents provide. Again, saying we have a policy of denying access without a valid judicial warrant. If they do have a valid judicial warrant, double check it and limit the search to the scope of the warrant and follow them, in what they're doing and document what's happening. Next slide, please. I'm gonna skip this one. Okay, so if agents stop and question you, let's say you're on the street or wherever you are, you can ask, am I free to leave? If you are, you can calmly walk away. If you have valid immigration documents, such as a green card, you can show them to the agents if you're asked, or if you feel like it would be helpful, to show it. If you don't have immigration documents, you can refuse to answer any questions and you shouldn't show them anything. You can always invoke your right to remain silent. So you can always say, I'm going to remain silent, and then you have to stay silent. So invoke your right and don't engage in conversation. And then you can also say, I do not consent to any searches. Next slide, please. If you're being detained by agents, there are certain things you can do. So when we say detained, it's, maybe that step where they're questioning you, it's clear to you that you can't really leave, like they're cornering you, but they haven't yet arrested you. So if it looks like that's what's happening, you can always ask, why am I being detained? You will have to identify yourself if they ask, but you don't have to answer other questions. So you can say, I'm going to remain silent. I want to speak to a lawyer. I will not be signing anything until I speak to a lawyer. I do not consent to any searches. Next slide, please. And then if you're actually arrested, it's important that you let people nearby know your name, your full name and your date of birth, and your family's contact information so that they can help find you. So knowing your full name and date of birth will help people figure out where the agents have taken you. It's also helpful to know your country of origin and your A number if you have one. But I do understand that, that's not really necessarily a conversation you want to be having in front of the immigration agents. So just make sure that, somebody that is close to you has this information about you. And if you do get arrested, like in a place where your family's not there, that you tell whoever's there, your name, date of birth, and how to contact your family. Next slide, please. Okay. Also wanted to quickly talk about a federal lawsuit that Public Counsel and the ACLU brought on July 2nd, along with many, many community partners, on behalf of some individual plaintiffs that were stopped, arrested, and detained, and also nonprofit organizations. So this lawsuit is regarding in our region, the LA region, the suspicionless stops, the warrantless arrests, all based on racial profiling and the lack of access to counsel and the inhumane conditions at B18. B18 is a detention center in downtown LA. So that lawsuit was filed July 2nd. Then on July 11th, the federal judge granted our 2 requests for a temporary restraining order against the government's actions. Specifically, one of the orders says it prohibits any agency that's carrying out immigration activities in the Central District from using these 4 factors alone as their basis to stop and arrest people. So the agents cannot use just somebody's apparent race or ethnicity, the fact that they speak Spanish or English with an accent, the fact that they're present in a particular location, like a bus stop or car wash, or the work that they do. So under the restraining order, these agencies cannot use just these 4 factors to stop and arrest people. The second order says that the government must provide access to counsel at B18, the detention center in downtown, 7 days a week, and also provide confidential phone calls. So these are really important orders that came down July 11th. The government has appealed these orders to the Ninth Circuit, but as of today, the orders still stand. What that means is it doesn't mean that there's not going to still be, raids or that immigration agents aren't going to still arrest people, but it means that, they can't be doing it based on just the 4 factors, and they also have to allow access to counsel at the B18 center. If you know of people that are being stopped and arrested based on these 4 factors after July 11th, or you know of a situation where at B18 people are not having access to counsel and access to confidential phone calls, please let us know. Yes, sorry, it should say July 11th, 2025. It says 2015. That's a typo. please let us know. We have our contact information at the end because we are tracking everything and updating the judge about the state of what's happening. And that these orders apply to the Central District, which covers 7 counties, including LA County. Next slide, please. Okay, if you're going to document record, again, do it from a safe distance, announce that you're recording. We also suggest that you do hand notes or typewritten notes, including all this information about the date and time and who the officers are and their badge numbers and etc. Next slide, please. These are just some additional resources. Also want to share the rapid response hotlines. These are numbers you can call if you do suspect ICE activity or a raid. You can call these numbers. They may be able to send an legal observer down or help in some other way. Also, this Immigrant Defenders Law Center Rapid Response Legal Resource Hotline is important because these groups that are part of this are keeping track of all the folks that have been arrested and detained and are trying to find a way to get them legal representation, mostly in the form of potentially providing support at bond hearings. So some folks are eligible to be out on bond while their immigration case proceeds. And so there are lawyers that are trying to help folks with that bond hearing type of procedure. But yeah, these are important numbers to keep handy. Next slide, please. Okay, so we will take time for Q&A. I know there's a lot of Q&A in the chat or in the Q&A function. So I don't know if DEO folks want to uplift some of the questions, or Gary, if you want us to just go through some of the ones that seem very important.
Yeah, I've flagged a couple as we're like going through, and I'm
Okay.
happy to
So,
highlight those. We have been getting a couple questions about the public-private distinction. And so, for example, if somebody has a home-based business, or additionally, if somebody has, if it's like a construction site, I think there was one other example, construction site, or also like a church. And I wanted to address kind of some of those questions, but Ritu, also please feel free to, especially for home businesses. So it would really depend on two things. One is what the physical location actually looks like, what kind of physical barriers prevent any member of the general public from entering certain areas. Would a member of the general public believe that they're not authorized to enter into a space without getting prior approval? For example, at a construction site, is there a fence around the construction site? Is there a security guard at the entrance who's saying, you need to have the badge or whatever, I need to know who you are in order to enter? Similarly, at someone's home, if there's what are the kind of physical barriers that prevent someone? It's how you are creating to the outside public the idea that this is a private space. I have the door closed. This is my private space. But also, it's about your behavior. So, for example, your construction site example, anyone and everyone can just come and go on the construction site. Well, then it's not really a private space. Similarly, for a church, this is really important in church areas. You want to be a welcoming space that is available for everyone. But for example, is it always open to the public all the time? Are all areas open to the public? Maybe there's an area in the back that's not open to the public, that's just for church officials. Are the private meeting rooms, are those available to the public? So a space could be open to the public certain hours of the day, certain areas could be open to the public all the time, but it's also possible that areas could be private as well. And Rita, do you want to add anything about home businesses specifically?
yeah, so I mean, I work with a lot of childcare providers that are running childcare programs out of their homes. And our advice is, if there's agents outside, you do not have to open your door, right? Like your home is a private space, even if you use it as like, for example, childcare business. And so you can refuse to open the door. If you do want to engage, you can keep the door closed and through the door ask, do they have a judicial warrant? Ask them to slip it under the door. The other thing you could do is you could go outside, close the door behind you, and go speak to them outside your house and see what they want. But yeah, I forget, Sophie, if there was a specific question about the home, but it is your home, so it's still a private place, even if you happen to run a business out of your home or you do like, some people will do create things, right, from their home, but then eventually they go sell it out in public. But at the end of the day, it's still your home, so you do have privacy rights there.
Yeah, thanks, Ritu. Also, somebody asked about schools and public schools. So, as many of you may know, there used to be an executive order that basically said that areas that are sensitive areas, sensitive locations, like schools, hospitals, and churches, ICE was supposed to get prior approval from a supervisor before entering that space. That policy was rescinded in January, and so there's no longer any additional permission that ICE would need to get before doing an action at a school or a church. That's not to say that all of those rights that we have just discussed don't exist anymore. It's just they don't need additional permission to try to enter a school. But even a public school is not open to the public. Not anyone can just enter a public school's campus. They need to sign in as a visitor. They need to get permission from the front office in order to enter. And so there are steps by which the staff could put in place in order to verify that this person actually has authorization to be on the campus. We also got a lot of questions about identification, both by ICE and individuals. So a lot of folks are asking if ICE is required to identify themselves both to a person, to other law enforcement. And there's technically no law that would require ICE to identify themselves to the general public. However, there are two laws that are currently in progress, one at the US congressional level and then one at the California state level, which would require ICE not to wear face coverings, for example, and to identify themselves. So as it is right now, they're technically required to carry identification with them. And there was also an LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department memo for the city of LA that was former Sheriff McDonnell, currently Police Chief McDonnell, had said that he authorizes LAPD officers to ask these ICE officers for identification. That was due to the large amount of fear in the community that was saying that these folks are not actually federal agents. And so they have directed LAPD officers to ask them for identification. Depending on the situation, LAPD would also be required to identify themselves. It depends if they're undercover or the scenario, but they generally will identify themselves if asked. Let's see what else we got. Also, similarly, if they wear a mask, you could try asking of them to remove their masks, but they probably will not do so.
Yeah, somebody is asking about like clinics. So even at healthcare clinics, right? You might have spaces that are public, spaces that are private. The lobby is generally, it could be public. It just depends, right? Like public counsel, we consider our lobby to be private because not anybody can just come into the lobby. Our doors are always closed, and if you want to get in, you have to be a staff member with a badge. You have to scan your badge and the door opens, or you have to be a client with an appointment who speaks to the receptionist through an intercom, and then the receptionist will open the door for you if you're a client with an appointment. So because of that, our lobby is considered private. But I know a lot of people I work with tell me, well, our doors are closed, but anybody can press the button and it'll open and then they'll get to the lobby. So then your lobby's not really private. But even if that's the case and agents come in because they press the button and they get into the lobby, that doesn't mean that then the agents can just enter the private patient rooms or private offices without a judicial warrant. They still need a judicial warrant to go into the private parts of your clinic or your facility.
Thanks, Ritu. So another question was about what kind of identification people should carry. So, for example, we have heard reports that ICE, if somebody is not able to present identification immediately, that they are held until they are able to um, verify within their own databases whether this person is a US citizen, a permanent resident, etc. So depending on, your own risk identification, how much risk you feel that you might be in for a false identification of you being undocumented, based on your race, your accent, your clothing, etc. It may be a good idea to carry either a physical copy, for example, a printout of your passport, a copy of that, or your California ID if you have it. We have heard reports where people were taken, they were held in a bus for 12 or more hours before the ICE officers were able to confirm, and then they were just released. So it can be a very scary scenario. I will, though, note that, for example, if you carry a copy of your ID or your passport on your phone, handing your phone to an officer also gives them permission to review your phone as a whole. And so it's best practice not to have those copies digitally, but to have them printed. I also see a question about harboring and about what to do if you are sort of arrested illegally. Two things I'll say about that. First, on the if you're arrested illegally, there's technically no recourse that you would have financially against the individual officer. They are protected by federal law, by qualified immunity. And so there's case law that you wouldn't be able to pursue financial compensation against the individual. However, if that arrest led to adverse criminal consequences, you should just always document this and then speak to a lawyer about your individual situation, because it could, for example, help you get a charge dismissed or to challenge the admissibility in court of any evidence that they've collected. On harboring, harboring is a federal crime, and that is basically that you are concealing someone from federal officers for the purpose of helping them evade capture. So that would be, for example, you know that someone's undocumented and you know that that ICE is trying to capture them, and you take affirmative action to conceal them, to help them get away, to give them information, to help them get away. However, this does not mean that you can't, for example, rent a room to somebody who's undocumented. You can't, be friends with somebody who's undocumented. There's even case law that says that somebody who her boyfriend was undocumented and she knew he was undocumented and they shared a room or they shared an apartment because, for example, he was submitting an application to USCIS for a visa. They knew exactly where he was. He wasn't trying to prevent or be concealed. If they wanted to find him at that location, they could have. So again, it's that purpose is the action portion to conceal someone, and also the reaction of that has the intended purpose to conceal them. And this is why we recommend generally, so if ICE is at the door, you are more than welcome to tell everyone, ICE is at the door. You are able to share information to everyone, regardless of immigration status, that helps them make the best decision for themselves. What you couldn't say is, ICE is at the door, everyone go run and hide, or you that I know is undocumented, go run and hide in that back room, because you're instructing them to conceal themselves. You can say things like, we are going to close our doors. I would ask that everyone, please, for your safety, go inside. Regardless of your immigration status, our staff is going to, speak to the officers outside and try to resolve the situation. And as Ritu mentioned, if they do have a valid judicial warrant, you're required to let them in. So depending on what the judicial warrant says explicitly, you would then have to follow those, if it is a valid judicial warrant, follow those instructions. So the whole message here is share information with people as much as possible, while also, limiting the scope of the investigation only to what you're legally required to do by that warrant.
So, okay, I'm gonna address this too because it comes up a lot. I know we're at time, and we can do another session. I know there's just never enough time. So some folks host events outside, like for example, if Public Counsel were to host like a food pantry event or something. Of course, when something's outside, like at a park or, it's in the public, right? So anybody can access the event. Um, and you can't really demand that the agents have a judicial warrant to be in a park. But there are things you could do, you could try to move the event inside, right? That would help. But if it's not feasible, you can if the event's happening outside, you can have somebody from your staff, be on the lookout. If agents do arrive, that person or someone else could be the one interacting with the agents, asking them like, what's your purpose for being here? Requesting that they leave. They may not leave, but just asking that they leave. And then you want to make sure that people who do attend the event have access to the red card so they know what their rights are. They know that they don't have to talk to the agents. They can, remain silent. They can exercise all the rights that we've been talking about today. And then you can also have somebody on staff have the rapid response numbers on hand to call those numbers if, again, if ICE shows up and they are talking to people. So those are the things you can do. You can like shift it to be inside so it's safer, or if it has to be outside, have somebody on guard to, be watching if there's ICE activity and be the one to talk to ICE and ask that they leave, and have red cards available for people so they know what their rights are and call the rapid response numbers.
And apologies, we have a lot of questions in here. We have still 400 people in this event, so we're getting a lot of questions and we're still trying to scroll through everything.
I wanted to jump in to just remind folks that,
Yeah.
hi, I'm Gary Smith from DEO. We will be sharing this recording out, as we've said a few times, so just folks, just remind folks of that. And then also, there'll be resources shared on our DEO website. We'll be getting that up very soon. And we will be planning some additional webinars as well, as Ritu and Sophia have both mentioned, one in Spanish, and we'll look at doing another part 2 in English as well too. So I just wanted to throw that out and thank Public Counsel so much. Fantastic presentation. Really appreciate all this information and trying to get to all the questions. I know is a challenge, but I just wanted to make sure I know we're at time. Wanted to jump in and thank you all so much for attending. Ritu, Sophia, is there any closing thoughts or anything you wanted to share?
No, I mean, I just thank you all for attending, and I know this is a really difficult time, but I think it's helpful for us to know what our rights are and to do our best to exercise them. And yeah, we'll do more. So we'll do another session. So don't worry. And yes, I meant to say the orders were issued July 11th, 2025. Okay. So yeah, thanks everyone.
So much. Thank you all so much. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.